Regularly scheduled programming will not be seen, so that we may bring you the following special presentation from WVEC TV.
The beach at Colleville-sur-Mer in northern France is nearly perfect. The water is clean and shallow, the beach wide, unlittered, and nearly deserted. A sun worshiper today might call this a beach to die for. A half-century ago, a lot of Americans did just that. Back then, this was Omaha Beach. In the dreary gray pre-dawn hours of a June morning 50 years ago, the Germans in this bunker looked out across the English Channel and saw the biggest invasion force in history. The date has become so famous that no further explanation is needed. It was the 6th of June, 1944. It was D-Day.
We were all scared. Wasn't no damn two ways about it. No two ways about it.
We firmly believed in what we were doing. We knew that if Hitler was successful, what the world would be.
And so the fate of whole nations depended on what we did on that day. And I am very proud to have been there.
That's B battery right there. That's a whole battery taken up in Fort Meade.
It's been 50 years since that day in June 1944. The scrapbooks may be getting brittle and yellow, but memories are razor sharp.
Bumpy garden.
That's you.
Yeah, that's me right there.
For a half century on both sides of the Atlantic, the men who stormed into Normandy have stuck together, a bond only a fighting man could understand.
And every time you meet, you fight the battles over again. The shrapnel flies, the bullets fly. And this happens every month, and you're still talking about 50 years on.
But that's a comfort to us. It really is. It helps us.
I have people at my church ask me, Jimmy, why do you go to so many reunions? I said, well, I can't explain it to you. If you're not part of it, you wouldn't understand it.
This year, thousands of veterans are returning to Normandy. Some will stop in southern England and visit the D-Day Museum in Portsmouth to see their story in the 272-foot-long Overlord embroidery, each of its 34 panels telling one part of a battle that changed the world. By spring of 1944, the tide of battle was swinging toward the Allies. Convoys were getting through to England. Allied armies were rolling north through Italy. 2 days before D-Day, they would capture Rome. But in the spring of 1944, London, all of its history, all of its landmarks were still very much at war, still very much at risk. And the world knew what had to happen, an invasion across the English Channel into France. It was no longer a question of if, the only questions were when and where. The Allies had argued about the answers for years. Stalin and the Soviets wanted an early invasion to relieve the hard-pressed Red armies. Roosevelt had also pressed for quick action. But the British view, the one hashed out in places like this Cabinet War Room deep under the Parliament building, was the one that prevailed. It held to sticking to less risky operations and using the time to build the greatest invasion force the world had ever seen. That force would be centered in Portsmouth, the historic home of the British Navy. Charles Dickens was born here. So was Sherlock Holmes in the mind of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now it would give birth to Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. Just outside of Portsmouth, the Royal Navy had commandeered an estate called Suffolk House. It would become the headquarters of General Dwight Eisenhower. And in the nearby village of Suffolk, the pub became the officers' mess.
Eisenhower used to drink half pints of beer, which were brewed in the brew house just behind the Golden Lion pub, And Montgomery was a teetotaler. He used to have orange squash.
Is that right?
Yes, and the lady who serves them, we know all this because the lady who served them still lives in the village. The school was taken over for planning meetings and the children had to move out when the officers moved in to do their planning. It's just as it was as Eisenhower would have recognized it.
So if he were here today, he'd recognize
everything, yes.
Many of these homes date back to the 1400s. Reverend Griffith's church was built in 1133. To him, it's all a bit ironic.
Well, it seems so strange. This is a little village which really hasn't changed for centuries. I mean, it really never developed. And yet it was the place which was chosen for the headquarters of this enormous invasion.
The entire southern coast was affected. In Poole, the local boatyard began building landing craft. The town pottery became the headquarters for the U.S. Coast Guard. The historic port of Plymouth. Here, Englishmen once used these steps to board a ship for America named Mayflower. Now Americans came to Plymouth, by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands.
I remember, I think perhaps most of all, I remember the friendliness of the American forces, and I remember the generosity of the American forces, and I think that's what's endeared them to me over the years, and also to many British people also.
Larry Spear was just a boy, but he remembers that times were tough.
We were at such a level there that we could barely live, really. You know, you used to have 2 ounces of butter and 2 ounces of lard to last you the week.
The Americans would try to help.
And they used to pass our house and they used to drop in a tin of Spam.
But of all the thousands of Yanks, Larry remembers one better than all the rest.
I think he had exceptionally good taste because he married the most beautiful girl, or he set his eyes on the most beautiful girl in Plymouth.
Tell him the name of the horses.
All right, that's Corky.
Today, his sister Edna and that Yank, Leonard Muter Jr., Sonny, live in Chesapeake with 4 horses, a dog, and memories of a wartime romance in England. They met at a dance, strange since neither knew how. Then, a few days later,
by chance I met him in town. And he said, "You going to the dance?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "See you up there." So we went up to the dance and we were singing from then on.
They were engaged in spring 1944. Sonny would visit Edna at home, a place with a storybook name. Lickety Cottage is gone now, but Lickety Lane is still there.
And we kids, although, you know, we were only little tackers at the time, and there was a proper tribe of us in the family, but we loved him.
Then one day Sonny said he couldn't leave camp, but she could talk to him through the fence.
Which I did. That was sometime in April 44. I didn't see him again until August 45.
Sonny and the 29th Division fought their way on and off Omaha Beach, all the way across France and then into Germany. Edna waited and worried.
Well, sometimes it would go 6 or 7 weeks without any mail, you know. And you didn't know they're dead or alive or whatever.
Finally, the war ended, and Sonny wondered why all the other engaged GIs had long since returned to England to get married. Then he learned that his personnel officer, a family friend, had held his request, thinking his family might object.
And I cocked my up Thompson. And he threw his hands up. He said, wait a minute, wait a minute. And he come over and got me by the arm and carried me right into the colonel. He said, "Colonel, for God's sake, send this stupid man to England and let him get married before he kills me."
He did just that, and Sonny and Edna lived happily ever after. Down the coast, Weymouth embarked more Americans for Normandy than any other port, more than 800,000. The city has changed so little, it's not hard to picture the 2nd Ranger Battalion marching off for Pointe du Hoc, the harbor filled with landing craft where today there are pleasure boats. Here in Weymouth and elsewhere, the Americans formed a deep friendship with the people of England.
It was in October 1943 when we saw our very first Americans, and we really and truly took them to our hearts, and that was the American 1st Division, the big red one.
I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through.
And I know I'm an old lady of 67 on the outside, but inside I'm still 17 years old. I can still remember those days. And the LSTs and the LCTs that were damaged or had something wrong with them used to pull in there like cars in a car park. And they used to play the radios very loudly with the AFN, the American Forces Network. And us girls used to go down on the beach and jitterbug with the sailors on the beach in our bare feet. Oh, it was marvellous.
I'll be seeing you.
For Don Gould, too, there was one American in particular, a Southern gentleman from New Orleans. They met at a dance, took long walks in the country, and on May 8, 1944, they were engaged. On June 6th, he stormed Omaha Beach.
He wrote to me 2 or 3 letters, and then all my letters came back in a big bundle, and it had the drawing of a pointing finger on it, pointing to my return address, and it said deceased, return to sender. So I never did find out whether it was D-Day or D-Day +1 or whatever. But I put the wreath on the American Memorial the 6th of June every year for him. We used to walk all around the cliffs and the country lanes, and we always used to pick a big bunch of honeysuckle, so I don't buy flowers from the shop. I just give him the English honeysuckle.
The world had never seen anything like it. 3 million assault troops, thousands of tanks, trucks, and guns, 6,000 ships and landing craft, 11,000 aircraft. Invasion planners faced enormous problems but found novel solutions. It was expected to take weeks to capture a French port big enough to handle enough supplies for the massive force, so the Allies built their own. Huge hollow concrete blocks like these, which today are still in the port of Weymouth, were towed across the channel, flooded, and sunk to form a breakwater. It was given the whimsical name of the Mulberry Harbor, and today in Arromanches you can still see what's left of it. To mark the invasion beaches at night, British miniature submarines like this one in the Submarine Museum would show green lights. To move the vast quantity of heavy equipment, America contributed the new LSTs, which could be beached to load or unload.
Today, 50 years later, some of these loading areas are still here. This is what's called a hard stand. It's covered with civilian boats today. But back in 1944, the American LSTs would pull in up on this ramp, open their doors, and begin loading men and equipment bound for Normandy.
The Germans had spent 4 years getting ready. Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, was an elaborate network of minefields, obstacles, guns, and bunkers. So tough, some remain intact today. But fortunately for the Allies, many had been built in the wrong place. Military logic predicted the invasion at the narrowest part of the channel, between Dover and Calais. Besides, there was the massive American First Army Group around Dover, commanded by General George Patton. So the Germans built the heaviest fortifications to defend Calais. What the Germans didn't know was that Patton's First Army Group didn't exist. It was an elaborate hoax. The real Allied buildup was much further west, in 1,100 camps, most hidden in forests. By the spring of 1944, the Allies were staging dress rehearsals of the coming assault on English beaches chosen for their similarities to Normandy.
Slapton Sands. And that was a beach that we used to hit. We probably hit it 4 or 5 times.
Slapton Sands is still here, looking probably not a whole lot different than it did in 1944, when everyone who hit the beach at Normandy hit this beach at least once. But today, Slapton Sands is known for something else, a tragedy the world didn't learn of until 40 years after it happened.
The world might never have learned were it not for local resident Ken Small. Slapton Sands saw a series of tragedies, beginning with the forced evacuation of the nearby villages.
Some of the elderly died prematurely, some committed suicide, some would not come back to those homes that they'd been forced out of those years ago.
For Ken Small, it all began 25 years ago with a walk along this beach.
I started to pick up live bullets, mines, shells, shrapnel, American money, signet rings.
Few officials would answer his questions, but slowly the details of an Allied blunder began to emerge. It happened on April 28, 1944, during Operation Tiger, the final 4th Division dress rehearsal for the landing on Utah Beach.
At 2 o'clock in the morning of that day, April 28th, that convoy was in the channel, not 60, 70, 80 miles from German territory, virtually unprotected, and was found by 6 patrolling German torpedo boats, and they blew hell out of it.
749 Americans died. Many, top-heavy with equipment, inflated their life preservers and drowned. Their bodies were found floating feet up. The incident was kept secret. Even the men in the rehearsal, like Curtis Nixon of Portsmouth, didn't know what had happened.
The sinking of the ships was all a surprise. We didn't hear about it until 30 or 40 years later.
For 15 years, Ken Small fought both Washington and London, trying to build a monument to those who died. He finally managed to buy a Sherman tank for $50 and paid to have it recovered from 60 feet of water. Today it stands in tribute to the Forgotten Dead, as he titled his book. He says it's all been worth the price, to him and to people like the Alabama woman who lost a brother in the war but never knew how he died.
She said, "Pray God, I hope you can help me." I looked in the back of the book and there was his name for the first time. Like so much with this story, it sent shivers down my spine. I sent her a copy of the book. 3 weeks later, an 8-page letter came back. Every word was a thank you, ending with the words, "Never ever will I understand how it is that one man and an Englishman, all those thousands of miles away, has given me and my mother the peace of mind we have sought ever since World War II."
By late May, the rehearsals were over. The troops were moved out of their camps amidst great secrecy.
We were going along the road and all the lorries were closed down, all the canvas drapes were down, field security police running up and down. We were told if we put our head out we were liable to be shot.
When they got ready for the invasion, they put us in like a holding camp. Nobody could go in and nobody could come out.
On June 1st, troops began loading for the real thing, D-Day, the 5th of June. But the weather turned bad. The landing had to be postponed. At Suffolk House, Eisenhower and his staff sweated out the weather and kept track of the invasion force on this very map. Finally, a break, slightly improving conditions for the 6th. Eisenhower convened 2 meetings, the first at 9:30 p.m. on the 4th, the second 7 hours later. At 4:15 on the morning of the 5th of June, 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower made the final decision in this room. He said simply, "Okay, we'll go." The Normandy landings were on. D-Day would be the 6th of June.
There was an American sailor there, and he said, "Say, buddy, have you got any live ammunition?" So I said, "Yes, we have." God, he said, "This is the real thing." Then we knew it was.
The fleet gathered, battleships and cruisers from Scotland and Ireland. They fell in behind the minesweepers, then troop ships and boats from every port in southern England. By dark on June 5th, the greatest armada in history was steaming south.
The amazing thing in crossing was the number of ships out there. I've never seen so many ships in one sea in all my life.
And I was sick all the way over. I was on the top of the stairs. I couldn't go down below because I couldn't stand the stench of the vomit and the diesel fumes.
Above this seasick armada, the sky filled with thousands of airplanes. The first troops into France would come not from the sea, but from the air. Eisenhower had made an agonizing decision, sending 3 crack divisions on what his staff said might be suicide. But the Allies knew that inland the Germans held their feared panzer divisions in reserve. They couldn't be allowed to reach the beach.
Our objective was to block reinforcements from getting to the beach, to throw the beach back into the ocean.
At 11:10 p.m., what was at the time the largest airborne assault in history took off from England. The troops didn't know it, but they'd be jumping from only 300 feet.
But I knew we were close. because we could look out the aircraft and knowing you could see the cows in the field.
Anybody that jumps out of an airplane that says he's not scared, he's either a liar or a fool. The jump was scattered awful. I never will forget the platoon leader says, hey, he said, if you think we were confused, he said the Germans were more confused than we were.
And I jumped right in the edge of St. Mary Glees itself. I jumped out not too far from the old church.
Private John Steele came down on the old church. He dangled from the steeple for 2 hours before being captured.
It was just little fights everywhere. And of course, they had some big fights, but most of it were small groups.
St. Mary Glees was liberated about noon on June 6th. Bill Howard was in a firefight at LaFair Manor. He and his lieutenant stormed inside.
This was 3-story. I could hear them going up the silo, so I was shooting into the silo.
The airborne assault had been a success. Utah Beach was safe. 13,000 men from the 82nd Airborne made the drop. On July 14th, only 5,000 were able to walk out. Bill Howard went back to LaFair Manor in 1979 and took this picture. His bullet holes are still in the silo. In San Mariglis today, there's now an airborne museum, and on the old church in the town square, a dummy in a parachute hangs where Private John Steele once did. Today, Bill Howard and Jimmy Wynn are members of the 82nd Airborne Association, and awfully proud.
We just believed in one another. And nothing we couldn't do.
And I would do it again in a heartbeat.
Through the night, the invasion fleet bore down on Normandy. There were 5 beaches. Utah and Omaha were American. Gold, Sword, and Juneau were British and Canadian. There, the assault came at dawn.
The noise was tremendous. That frightened you more than anything else, I think.
I was frightened, I was excited, but to me it was just like an exercise until I hit the beach, and then I saw dead bodies all over the place, wounded, crying out.
We landed at La Hamel, and the idea was that we would clear the beaches and go inland and take it from there. But it wasn't quite as simple as that. The little village was quite well fortified.
And as I came off the beach, there was a Frenchman there. He had got a brass fireman helmet on.
Welcome! Welcome to you all!
And I don't know if you've seen the film The Longest Day, but they show it there.
Thank you, boys! Thank you! Vive la France!
I ran past him and he was shouting out, Vive la France, vive the wrong way. He's got a bottle of champagne in one and a glass in the other, and he's trying to give us a drink as we was running off the beach. Shells flying everywhere.
There's a lot of very peculiar blokes on this beach.
But not all the French were serving champagne that morning. Today, Leon Gautier lives in Ouistreham, near the spot on Sword Beach where he came ashore on D-Day, near the monument to the French 4th Commando, of which he was a member. It's built on top of an old German pillbox. For him, it's a special place.
There was 8 of them between the landing beach to here. And that was the last one we took in the morning on the 6th. Well, we crawl along on the sand there, and as we get near, very near of it, we jump there, and we come next to and we took a grenade and we throw it inside. We throw the grenade inside.
And after that?
Oh, well, it was all over, you know, no more problem.
It was here that the French commandos assaulted the Ouistreham Casino.
One of the French troops come down, our French troops about 70 miles, and they come down here this way to attack the casino. Then obviously there was no house there at the time.
When the troops came, they came right down that street?
Yeah, we passed here, they come down that street. 4 of them were killed anyway.
A plaque marks the spot where they fell. His unit suffered 40% casualties, but he says the price had to be paid.
You know, we have a job to do and we make sure we do it.
And you did it.
We done it.
At the British beaches, things were actually going quite well. Most of the early objectives had been taken. And then the British ran into this. This is Strong Point Hillman, and things got bad very quickly. Just how strong was this fortified position? Well, take a look at this. An artillery shell hit here, and all it did was take a little chip out of the side.
It was surrounded by 11 machine gun positions and these all had steel cupolas over the top of the position, and they were firing 17-pounder anti-tank shells at the cupolas, and they were just bouncing off.
The British finally overran Hillman just before dark, but the Germans and their commander were holed up inside. Then, the next morning,
he came marching out in his full dress uniform, highly polished boots, his back was behind him, carrying 2 suitcases, and there was another 75 men came out, and we'd been on top of them all night.
Les Perry and Roy Tomlin were both seriously wounded. Tomlin so seriously that his commander's wife wrote this letter to his mother expressing sorrow at his death. Perry, incredibly, survived stepping on a landmine.
People have said to me many times, why don't you forget the war? I said, how can I forget the war? You can't forget it. I mean, every time I get undressed, I look down and my leg is still full of shrapnel. I've got 72 pieces of shrapnel in that leg. It's such a terrifying experience, you just cannot forget it.
In the French harbor at Grand Camp Mézy, Curtis Nixon is off for waters he hasn't sailed in 50 years. Waters off of Utah Beach.
The fourth division was all the way over.
Curtis didn't have to go off to war. He worked at the Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth.
It was time for my deferment to come up, and I told the boss to not put me on the deferment list, that I wanted to go ahead and go into service.
So on June 6, 1944, he found himself in the first wave at Utah Beach with a box seat to history.
Right over in here was a boat turned upside down. There wasn't but 2 survivors, so 1 survivor, and he was giving the other guy artificial respiration. Well, it was firing everywhere when we came in here. Doors everywhere. They were firing machine guns from the landing craft. They were firing rockets from the rocket boats, and the ships were firing in.
How does it feel to be back here after 50 years? Kind of funny?
Really does. Really feels funny.
For the French crew, Curtis was something of a celebrity. So when the wind blew off his favorite hat, they executed a snappy hat overboard drill.
Yeah, my famous hat.
And they got it back for him.
Hey! Got it all cleaned up.
Sorry. We are right now on the left of Utah Beach.
We landed about in here somewhere.
Landed in the wrong place, a mile too far south.
It's lucky that we came this far south and didn't land on up there, because it's heavy fortified up there. I thought sure that we'd be up on right here close to the sand dunes, but when they dropped the door, we were way out there. We didn't get in far right on out here on the beach, but just as soon as we got over the sand dunes, we took terrific fire for artillery, and a lot of people was getting hit over there.
By the time you got up here to the beach, you didn't have to take out these pillboxes, and they were all neutralized.
We had satchel charges and all kinds of demolition charges, and didn't have to use any of them.
Well, what made Curtis Nixon take that first step off the boat? I mean, what was going through your head?
Well, not much of anything. You didn't have time to think about being hurt or something. I didn't think I would get hurt. I didn't think I'd get killed, anything else.
Curtis wanted to trace his route after Utah Beach.
Everything looks a little different.
So with our French driver Jean-Marie at the wheel, we headed inland. First stop was the tiny village of Poupeville. And exactly as Curtis had told us, we first came to a small bridge. But
that bridge sure looks different to me.
50 years ago, it had been booby-trapped. Poupeville was the first village he reached on D-Day. After 50 years, it too looked different.
We'd gotten up with another company, and the company commander had lost his clothes or something that happened to him. He was in his underwear going down the middle of the road.
His unit next passed by Saint-Marie-du-Mont. He remembered the church, but not much else.
Anybody recall glider plane lighting on top of a 3-story house. I thought I could just pick out everything, and I can't pick out nothing on it.
But his memories of what happened haven't dimmed.
It was the worst sight I think I saw the whole time I was over here in France. Was it looked like Germans had been lined up, column of 4s, and the tanks had been down through there and machine gunned them down. They were just laying everywhere. And the tank had run over top of some of them. When I went by, there was one German that was still alive, and he was pointing at his head and kept saying boom, 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 boom. We wanted somebody to shoot him. And man, I speeded up a little bit.
Curtis finally caught up with the war in Saint-Mère-Église. There was a tank battle.
I was sitting up on the turret, and they fired the gun. They blew the turret off of a German tank. And we dove off and went in the woods.
More than anything, Curtis wanted to find the spot where he was wounded on June 23rd, north of Montebourg. He had a military map showing where he was a few days earlier and an aerial photograph of the exact spot where he was shot, near a speck on the map called Iberville.
We couldn't advance because there was too much resistance in front of us. So we called up the tanks, and they came. We just got behind them and went right on through.
Yep. Here it is. Take a right.
In Iberville, we thought we hit pay dirt. A French farmer remembered the day the American tanks came through. But he couldn't identify anything in the aerial photo, so we were off again.
Right here, I think. This D62?
We searched every road in the area, but nothing looked quite right. But finally, a possibility. Curtis thought he remembered a hill, and a stand of trees was gone, perhaps chopped down, but the curve in the road was right, and so was this.
Yeah, well, it was sort of like that. It's double lanes, yeah, and just a hedgerow in between.
Like so many GIs, Curtis was wounded near a hedgerow, which farmers used to separate their fields. It was shortly after midnight. He was on one side, a German on the other.
And by that time, it was a streak of fire came at me. And I don't know whether I got a shot off or not, but when that bullet hit me up in my arm, it felt like a truck hit me. And I was standing on my feet next thing I knew. And it was like you cut a hose into the blood was gushing out so bad.
Curtis spent the night in agony, trying not to give away his unit's position. Help came at daybreak. Curtis was awarded the Bronze Star, but on Halloween 1944, doctors amputated his arm. After 50 years, he still has pain. He still doesn't feel he did anything special. He just did what a soldier is supposed to do.
Yeah, I figured that, well, it would happen to somebody else, not me. And that's just the way things go.
It got the name Bloody Omaha for a reason. 90% of American D-Day casualties were suffered on these sands. Everything went wrong. The 2nd Ranger Battalion was sent to knock out big German guns at Pointe du Hoc. 225 men started up these cliffs. 90 made it to the top. They found no guns. The Germans had already moved them inland. Today, the area is still pockmarked with craters from bombs and shells. There were many reasons why Omaha was so bad. The landing was at low tide to avoid German beach obstacles, so troops had to cross 400 yards of open sand to reach cover at the seawall. Meanwhile, the Germans dug in up in the hills were shooting right down their throats. The naval shore bombardment had lasted only 35 minutes and aerial bombing had been ineffective. The seasoned German 352nd Division had been moved to Omaha Beach for maneuvers. No one knew it was there. And airborne assaults behind the other beaches had distracted the German defenders. There had been no airborne assault behind Omaha. Two American divisions landed here, the 1st Division and the 29th, the Virginia National Guard. What they found was a nightmare that's lasted a half-century.
You couldn't walk on the beach. Once in a while you might find enough clear space to put your foot down, but there was bodies all over it. All over it.
The whole beach just looked like, we'd say like Ocean View on a hot day with bodies laying on it. And the Germans were looking right down at us, and just as soon as the landing crashed, the doors would open up, they just blow them wide open, and the boys were seasick, and it was just a terrible mess.
You were scared to death. And I don't care who says you're not scared of death, you were scared of death.
I said, hey, I'm going to get up against that seawall. I'm going to look around. If I don't see anybody running, then I'm going to get up and run. I don't know how many times we got up and ran, at least 5, but it was a 400-yard beach. 5 times would be 80 yards at a crack. A shell came in, and we ducked down. It was an 88. I just happened to look down, and I had a big hunk of meat in my lap. It had hit my assault jacket up here and had come all the way down. So I had blood all the way down the assault jacket. And I was numb. I said to Sergeant Ryan, I said, Sergeant, look at this. And he looked at me, he said, is that from you? And I said, you know, I don't even know. I heard someone yelling for the medics and found out that a man down below me had lost a leg. And that hunk of meat was from his leg.
We had 4 guns on ducks, and the waves are about 6 foot high, and they hit them sideways and turned all of them over. We lost all the guns in the battalion except 1. I was over in the channel, I guess, for half an hour. I thought I was going to freeze to death, and they finally picked me up, put me back on what is known as a Rano, which is a long steel boat where just carried trucks and things. And the Navy boy on there gave me a Navy jacket, a pair of dungarees, and a helmet, and that's how I went ashore, just like a war correspondent and had nothing but myself. But that Navy jacket, I kept it during the whole war.
When the ducks started going down and we started losing our equipment, I got serious. It was a question of survival.
See, when we sunk, I lost all my equipment, gun and all, so we had to get the guns from the people that had already been killed.
Our battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mullins, said to hell with our artillery mission, we're infantry. And they turned infantrymen.
I was naive enough to go ahead and be an infantryman. Didn't question it. I knew I didn't have an infantry rifle, but I had a carbine, so I used it.
It was so bad. The infantry companies lost 50% of their personnel within 3 hours of combat.
And at one time they thought about just leaving us there because we couldn't go back and we couldn't go forward.
By noon on D-Day, the situation on Omaha Beach was approaching desperate.
Much of this beach is blocked by either high bluffs or these high hills. In fact, there are only 5 places to get off the beach. One of them is here at the beach road to Saint Laurent. It's a place called the Verville Gap. On the afternoon of the 6th of June, at this very spot, the 29th finally broke through.
We had a commanding general by the name of Cody. He was assistant division commander. I'll never forget it. He just rose up and rallied all those troops.
Only 2 kinds of people are going to stay on this beach. Those that are already dead and those that are going to die. Now get off your butts. You guys are the fight, 29th.
He said, we got to get through. So he called on the engineers, and they started using Bangalore torpedoes. They were breaking through the minefields and the barbed wire, and they finally blew that bunker, which was about 13 or 14 feet thick.
The battle for Omaha Beach had been a costly victory. In one morning, the Americans suffered 3,500 casualties. Today, a graceful monument at the Verville Gap remembers the sacrifices on this beach. And Bill Halstead still insists that that Navy uniform got him through Normandy without a scratch. A few years back, the captain of the cruiser Normandy heard his story and invited him aboard.
He said, "I'm going to make you an honorary member of the Normandy." And that was one of the greatest honors anybody restored on me. And everybody on the Normandy used to invite me to picnics and things like that, and I was just like a regular member of the crew. So when they went over to Desert Storm, I said, "Well, take my jacket. You'll be safe if you take that jacket," because I went all through the war and didn't get a scratch.
Today, in the Normandy's wardroom, there's a tattered old jacket, Bill's lucky jacket, hanging there like it belonged to a regular member of the crew. In Norfolk's Forest Lawn Cemetery, a monument honors the Virginians from the 111th Field Artillery who fell in Normandy. Bill comes here often. There are 40 names cut in the stone. He knew virtually every man.
That was my cousin, Captain Consalvo. We were brought up together and over in Southern Oregon.
But for Bill Halstead, this memorial is special for an even more personal reason. He built it using his own money in memory of his friends.
All their bodies might be someplace else, but I believe their souls are right here at this man. Yeah, I'm mighty proud of that man.
The Normandy landing was the dawn of a new day for Europe. After D-Day, the outcome of the war was no longer in doubt. But nearly a year of bloody fighting was still ahead. 21,000 German soldiers lie in this cemetery alone. Above Omaha Beach, the final resting place of 9,400 Americans. Some D-Day survivors will never return here. After 50 years, the memories are still too painful. But others will, to find their own personal meaning on these hallowed sands, where the world and their lives were changed forever.
You'll never get over it. Never. You'll never get over it. I've had dreams after dreams. If I watch a war movie, it comes right back to me.
I won't go back. I never want to go back to Normandy. I guess because I left a lot of good men there, a lot of good buddies.
I have a very close friend, Tony Vadero, from the state of Pennsylvania, and he showed me the night before D-Day a picture of his wife and a baby that he had never seen. Tony was killed on the way to St. Lo, and his son would now be 50 years old. And I would love to be able to talk to his son and tell him what a great soldier his dad was and what a great person he was.
It was the 40th anniversary. I said, "Oh, well, I should take something back with me." And so I took my handkerchief out and took a handful of sand and put it in the back of my pocket and brought it home, kept it up on my dresser, and I don't know where it went to. My daughter said she didn't throw it away, but I believe she did. Anyway, I've gotten some more. It's just a little memento, that's all.